Before my next tutorial, I decided to do a quick review of Blender's user interface. Blender is a freeware 3D graphics editor. So this is a default diorama that every new file comes with. So you have a light source here. Selection in Blender, I should add, is counterintuitive in some situations. Like, for example, select is right-click and not left-click. I just made a little mistake there, you might have noticed, because I did a left-click and moved the little compass up there instead of, if you move the compass, you move it usually by left-clicking. Now, this view movement here that I'm doing, swinging back and forth, is done by using the mouse wheel as a button. So you hold it down in place and then you move the mouse. So here's another select. This is a camera. I just selected it with the right click. And that object can be selected with a right click. Just like in 3D Studio Max, these arrows are for moving things. See? Along the axes. Now, if I wanted to undo that, object, undo, object, undo. Now, my opinion is that Blender's interface, while complicated, like any good 3D graphics editor, is easier to use than 3D Studio Max and much faster. At least in part because you don't have layer upon layer upon layer of models. Even though, as you can see here, there is some layering up here. You see render layers, and so on. But when you're editing, this is really not a big thing. It's generally something that you can forget about if you're not doing anything very challenging. Now, what you do have are different modes for different tasks. So here I'm in object mode, and if I click this little menu here, I can also go to sculpt mode, vertex paint mode, weight paint, texture paint, and so on. But in most cases, I only use object and edit. And you'll see in my tutorials, generally this is reflected in my tutorials. So if I go to edit mode, the vertices of the model become visible. And they're often selected by default. So if I go to the select menu here in the lower left, I can deselect all. And you can see you can also use the A button. So deselect all, and if I hit the A button, it's selected again. Hit the A button again, deselect. Now if you want to select individual vertices, it's just like objects. You use the right click. Another counterintuitive feature of Blender is that in Microsoft Windows, you normally make multiple selections by using Control left click. In Blender, it is Shift right click, like this. And of course, just like with 3D graphics editing generally, you can also select edges and faces. My personal opinion is that this is easier to do in Blender as well, compared to 3D Studio Max. Either you can select a face, for example, piece by piece, using the vertices, so right-click, shift right-click, shift right-click, shift right-click, and notice the face lights up. I hit the A button to deselect. And then I can use the edges. If you notice, the select options are here. So if I click the edge select, right click, shift right click, shift right click, and shift right click. And I get my whole face selected. Hit the A button again, deselect. I can also do face select. And when you do face select, they give you these little dots to aim your pointer at. So right click, shift right click, and then if I want to deselect that, I hit A again. Very easy. Another thing you can do, well, there are a lot of things you can do. But one of the things that you can do is you can change your view, the way that you view the model. So here I have the solid mode activated, but there are other options. For example, you can go with a wireframe, where you can see right through the model like this. You can display textures, which unfortunately in this case you don't get much out of that because there aren't any textures assigned. And then materials, if the materials have something special about them, again, we don't get much out of that other than the glossiness of this particular set of materials. And rendered, well, that's what you get when you render. That's kind of obvious. And like most render modes, you can see it's really, really slow. Just comes with the territory. So we'll jump back here to the solid. And another thing I should add, you can also alter your transparency slightly. Give me a second here. There we go. So this, if I have this clicked, you can see through the sides. See that? If I click it again, you can't. So this, they're saying limit selection to visible. And that's deceptive because that's not really what it is. You can make your model translucent by activating this. And that is very helpful when you're lining up vertices on something that you want to be symmetrical or not symmetrical. So it is very useful. Now, I mentioned materials. If we go over to this very complicated set of menus here, you can, much like in 3D Studio Max, call up all sorts of tools and so on. So you have scene tools here. See the camera? If you click this, you get another set of scene tools. But this is the render layer subset, if you will. And type of active data to display. It's another one. Scene, render layers. This says scene here, but it's saying render. These are the render tools. I got that a little bit wrong. Then if we go to this one, this is the world. So the different skies you can opt for. I don't usually render within Blender, so it's not one that I use a lot. Then the object. This is useful, of course, because you can, for example, you go to object mode, select this object. You can rotate, although this doesn't seem to be working as I thought it would. I almost never use this, actually. I'll show you what I do use, though. Oh, no, it did. Look at that. I missed that completely. It did move. Okay, so 20 degrees. There we go. I was just not paying close enough attention. So, yeah, you can rotate using this. But actually, you know, the menu that I usually use for this sort of thing, you call up by pressing the little plus button. You see that little tab? It's almost not visible, but if you click that, you get all these transform tools. And the advantage of that is that you can also do exact dimensions. This would be in metric by default.